Hi everyone, and welcome to the next of my paint along demos in soft pastel. I'm continuing on with the wildlife theme after my recent little barn owl study, and I've seen so many of you do your own version of the barn owl, and they are all turning out great. So I hope that I can repeat that with this lovely stag, and that many of you will have a go at this too. Be sure to check out all of my other paint along demos here on YouTube, along with lots of other videos to help get you started in soft pastel. Also consider checking me out over on Patreon, where you'll find my full catalogue of real-time tutorials and lots more. But also while you're here on YouTube, please do hit that subscribe button and show me some support. So in this demo, I'm going to have a lot of fun with colour. I've already worked my background from a photograph that I have of some trees that are out of focus. So you can get this full tutorial on my Patreon channel if you want to paint along with this part. Or what I encourage you to do really is to come up with your own backgrounds. Either go plain and work with simple complementary colours, or just experiment with your own out of focus photography and see what you can come up with. But if you would like to create this background along with me, you can find that full tutorial now on my Patreon channel. There you'll also find the downloads for the photo reference of the stag, also my pencil drawing of the stag to get you started. But right here I'll put the photo reference so that you can pause on screen and either use this to draw from or to trace from to get going. So as well as experimenting with vibrant colours within the stag, I'm also going to be showing you how to get much of the intricate detail that is in the antlers. It's a notoriously tricky thing to paint, and I've chosen Pastelmat paper for this project just because you can get such lovely, clean, crisp edges, and that's what I'm hoping for with these antlers, and that we'll really be able to make them pop out from the background. So it's Pastelmat paper in the warm sienna colour, and I'm working at 8 by 10 inches. So this is quite small as well. You can work bigger if you want. And here are the colours that I used. These are mostly Unison pastels, along with some Faber Castell pastel pencils, which I did make use of in the finer details. But don't worry if you don't have all of these exact colours. Substitute for what you do have and make the palette your own. So I'm going to make a start on the antlers. I'm going to work my way from the top left downwards, but I'm going to get those antlers done before starting work on the deer. Antlers are one of the most tricky things to paint, I find, because there's really nowhere to lean your hand. Maybe I can anchor my finger on the other antlers while I'm working over here, but it's such intricate work. So my first tip for while I'm working on these antlers first, I'm just going to quickly tape a sheet of white paper just over the other half of my work. That way I don't have to worry as much. I can lean my hand here because I'm going to need a bit of an anchor to get some of the smallest details. So let's make a start. Now I do warn you, this is probably a part of the painting that is going to test your patience a little bit, as you would expect with something as precise and as pointy as antlers. And my whole objective here is to really get these antlers to pop out from that reasonably busy background. So I've really got to work at getting the edges of the antlers really crisp. So the first colour I'm picking up is lovely grey 9, a gorgeous subtle blue violet colour that I've used in the background. And I'm just giving the shadow side of the antlers a little rim of this colour. So I'm treating each one of these horns on the antlers, viewing it like a cylinder shape, and trying to figure out what the light is doing as it comes around each individual horn shape. So to capture the 3D quality of each one, I'm looking for the colour on the shadow side. Then you get almost a darker strip down the centre of each one, and then we're going to have that really bright white highlight coming down the right side of each one. So it's really just trying to use the colour to capture the 3D quality. And although I am going to be using the Unison pastels, so the big chunky sticks, you will see me using a lot more pastel pencil in this type of project, just because of the scale of the piece really. And I've decided to not work too big, so this is 8 by 10 inches. But in reality, a lot of the stag paintings that I do, the head of the stag ends up being usually much smaller than this, which is often the case with larger bodied animals because their head in proportion to the rest of them works out quite small within the painting. So that's why I wanted to do this as a demo, because quite often I'm teaching high amounts of detail on a larger face, a face where you've got space to add detail. But what about when you want to paint wildlife, for example, bigger animals? You're not going to have quite the same amount of space for detail on their faces, unless you paint them really huge. So I hope that this tutorial can help you get to grips with how to create the illusion of detail even when you're not able to work very big. So really, to begin with, going around the edges of the antlers, looking for any reflected colours on the edges, then trying to pick out some of the darker edges. And you can see it is tricky working with the bigger pastels when you're trying to get really fine detail or really sharp edges. And some of my pastel pieces are better than others for having a nice sharp edge. Normally I'll test the mark, so you can see my first mark there, I'm way off. And I sort of test my way up to where I want that edge to be and then try and sweep my mark around. But you'll see as I progress that there are many things then that you can do to come in and neaten your lines. So you can use your background colour here just to soften your edges. So it's very versatile. You can clean up those edges as you go, make everything nice and crisp and clean where you want it to be. Because you can see with my background that there are no hard edges on it. It's totally out of focus. But then in order to make my deer really contrast from that, I've really got to try and get some sharp contrast and some nice crisp edges. But the first bits of colour that I put down on the antlers, I don't have to be 100% neat with this. Just laying in some of the darker browns that I can see coming down the centre of each of the horns. And of course each one twists in a different way towards the light. So it's not like each one's got the same amount of highlight down the right side of it. They're all slightly different. So by really paying attention to the light and shade, it's going to help trick the eye of the viewer into really believing the lighting and the 3D quality of the antlers. So just using my fingertip to soften my marks into the paper. And I think for this project, the part that's going to take me the longest, I'm guessing, will be the antlers, because this part really is quite tricky. You want to get the edges of everything nice and crisp, and it can take a few goes to get that to happen. So you just got to have a little bit of patience with this part and really study each individual antler. And of course, I'm trying to make use of all the lovely vibrant colours that I used in my background. So some of the dusky blues and a lot of the more vibrant oranges. So whatever colour you've done your background, really try to bring some of those tones into your stag. So it's just all about trying to find a little sharp edge somewhere on it. Bringing some warmer tones into the antlers as well. Of course, they're not all cold shadow tones. There's a lot of warmth running down. So not adding any of this pastel too thickly, nice thin layers. Not letting the grain of the paper get full too soon, so that it's always ready to accept more layers, especially the highlight layers when we get to those. So it definitely helps to have my sheet of paper here, just something to lean on. I don't have to worry about smudging what's underneath my hand. And I don't often have to do this. Usually I've got somewhere left that I can lean, especially when I work mostly from top to bottom. But in this case, antlers are just so fiddly, such thin little pieces to work on, so it definitely helps just to have this here and know that I'm not doing any damage to what's underneath. So this lovely deep purple, used it a little bit in the bottom of the background. You can really use all sorts of colours. Really try to push your colour choices rather than just browns and greys. See what other vibrant colours you can pick up and still get the same effect. And that's what I'm trying to do with this little piece. Having a bit of fun with a vibrant background. So just starting to look for where the light starts around each of the curves. And not using my brightest white first, just picking out some of the highlights with a warmer orangey brown earth. Something that my white highlights will really still stand out from, but bringing a bit of warmth into the sunlit areas as well. So you don't usually want to come straight in with your brightest highlight. It's good to try and build up to those values, working from dark to light as much as possible. And you can see just how delicate a little mark you can get with, especially with these little crumbs of pastel, just how they wear down over time and they become more and more useful as they get smaller. Some of my most prized pieces of pastel are quite difficult to hold by the end. So just following the line of that strip of highlight as it comes down the antler, creating that other edge. So everywhere that the sun is hitting, just getting a little layer of this warmer colour. I'll try and get as much of the pigment on the paper using the bigger sticks. You can do a lot without the pencils. It's just a matter of some practice, getting a feel for using anything from this size up to the bigger sticks. And you just get a feel for that after some time. It's no different than picking up a paintbrush for the first time and having to get used to the feel of that. But they're so much fun to play about with when you do get onto them. And I'm so pleased to see so many people picking up pastel at the minute. It seems to have really taken off in the last few years. There's so much more instruction out there for how to use them. And I can just see a whole new wave of people forming a new but slightly healthy addiction. I don't feel too bad getting people addicted to this. So even though I haven't even got the main highlights on there, they're still pretty rough. just getting a little bit of light and shade in there already starts to bring them out from the background a little. And I do love painting deer. I love going and photographing them, spending time watching them. Really love these animals. And I like painting them too because it often gives me a chance to, well, not on the antlers, but it often gives me a chance to loosen up on the rest of the animal because I don't have a big face to go into lots of detail on. It's a much more it's usually much more like an animal within a landscape, so you get less of a chance to go into huge detail on just a face. So let's bring in a little bit of vibrance down these antlers now as well. Just between the areas of light and shade. Just trying to get some of that nice vibrant orange that I've used in the background. If you look in at the photo reference, you will see some really vibrant colours in those areas between light and shade in the photo reference. That's often where I look for a bit of vibrance. Again, not putting on the pigment very thickly, just really lightly rubbing it onto the paper. But you can see with the soft pastels that you get a lovely bit of vibrant colour off of the pastel stick without having to lean. All I really want are some hints of this lovely vibrant colour. Create some really glowing edges. So let's take a little bit of white now and start to pick out some of those brightest edges, because that's going to really help me see what else I need to do to each antler. So this isn't going to look white for very long because of the mess of my fingers, but I'm just trying to find a little piece of white that I've got some sharper edges on. If you find this really difficult, you can always turn your painting right round, and then you've got another chance to have a clean sweep at these like on the other side. But I really just take my time on them. And if I do go over the edge a little bit or make a little bit of a mess of one, it's not a problem to neaten that up or try and take some pigment off and have another go at it. It's not the end of the world if you don't get these marks on in exactly the right place. But yet it's pretty delicate work. And that is the problem with antlers. Each one is just so fine. And you've really got to paint a deer extremely large scale before you solve that problem. So the better idea is to just try and find a style that you can paint the bigger animals in without quite the same amount of detail in their faces. So if you're painting along with me, perhaps you have chosen to go bigger, and that will definitely help you to get this part of the painting. Definitely the trickiest part of the whole painting. So just looking for that little V shape at the bottom of this horn, how that ends where the shadow starts. Just paying particular attention to each individual horn. Like I said before, they all behave differently in the light because of the way they're twisted. But I'm really just trying to get the edges of each one sorted now, and then I can start to think about blending and softening the overall look of them. So this main highlight that runs right down from the top and really picks out this front edge. So it's delicate when you're even just trying to blend around the edges there. It is tricky, delicate work. And that's where I like to make use of some of these blending tools, just for where your finger is a little bit too fat for the job. Then you can use these little tools just to neaten your edges. So just paying particular attention to where the horns meet the main trunk of the antler, I suppose. Not sure of the terminology for antlers, but you know hopefully what I'm talking about. So very roughly we've got a bit of light and shade in there, and now it's really about neatening some of the edges, accentuating some of the dark areas again. And definitely in with a little bit of pastel pencil now at this stage, just to get some of the smaller details on each part. So if you've put too much pigment on too soon, you're going to find it difficult to control. So it's really about taking your time, building things up gradually. So just darkening down some of the areas again where it's gone a little bit light with my lighter layers. In order for your highlights to show up, Like on anything, you've got to have the dark contrast there first. So just deciding now which parts need to go really a lot darker to get that contrast to work. And then I've also got some green pastel pencils, and between using this for some parts of the background where I can just very lightly come back in and clean around the very tip of an antler. I don't want to give them outlines or anything, just trying to use a similar coloured pencil to the colour I have in the background, and just using that to really try and clean some of the edges of the antlers. Just give it a little bit more contrast from my background. And I can also use my white pastel pencil just to help shape my highlight a little better. Because I've used the soft pastel white to put the highlight down, it gives me a lot of pigment on the paper to play about with, rather than trying to get the strength of the white with just the pencil. I can really then use the pencil to accentuate areas of it or to move it around a little bit. But you can see why this is so time consuming, because each little part is quite intricate and tricky, and it's just about having the patience. But I really love painting stags, even when it is quite tricky when you're working on their antlers. Find it quite a satisfying thing to paint. They show light and shade so effectively, and that's my favourite thing to try and paint, no matter what the subject matter. If I can use some kind of colour trickery to show a bit of light and shade, then that's right up my street. I love using colour to try and show light and shade. So each of those little points starting to show some nice contrast against the background. It's starting to feel like it jumps out from the background a bit more. It's always a bit of a worry when you're adding quite a lot of colours and patterns in the background, but so long as you set it in the distance, like with the bokeh out of focus background effects, then you shouldn't have any problem as long as you add some nice crisp detail to your main subject. And that's the effect that I love to play with in paintings. So each horn actually isn't like a really fine point. Spend a little time just studying each one of these and really note the shape that it makes towards the top. It's not quite a straight point. They're a little bit rounded towards the very tip. Some of them do a sort of strange little hook, slight hook shape here at the end. So really study the shape of these if you want to improve your realism. But we're not too far off with this first set, and then I'll work on at the second set and see if there's any further adjustments I need to make when I see them both finished. But we're getting there with this first set of antlers. Again, just adding some little touches of colour. Just looking at the base of the antler and how that comes down and joins into the head. So just looking for any places where I can really help the contrast against the background. Neaten up some edges of the antlers while I'm doing that. But remembering to then soften that extra bit of colour into my background. Don't want to have any lines or harsh marks appearing back there. Just trying to accentuate little areas where I can really help these antlers stand out. And then also just with the light yellow pencil, just softening some of the areas between light and shade so that it's not all quite so harsh a line between those two areas. So just keep thinking of these horns as like cylinder shapes. Simplify each one down. Really look at where the light is hitting it. So we're pretty good with this one now. I've at least got most of the edges nice and clean so that I won't be worrying about having to lean my hand anywhere for anything too precise. So yeah, I think I can remove the paper now and get working on the other antler. So just the same again, only this time I've got a bit more space over here to lean my hand, so it should be okay. Not quite as tricky as the other side perhaps. It's quite tricky actually to chat and paint antlers. Trying to keep a steady hand a lot of the time. Just taking my time on some of the curves. So just looking again for those darkest parts of the antlers. You can see that our light source is coming from the right. So every left side of everything has got shadow colours. Always determine that before you start painting, where your light is coming from. And again, this isn't the easiest shape of a piece of pastel to get fine lines with, but for the first bit of colour that I put down, it's not too important that I get it perfect. You can see that that's quite rough looking. So here I can really use the edge of the pastel just to pick out that edge of the horn. Just not always easy to aim it and get it exactly where you want it. And just like everyone, I have that problem too, just like with the top of this one. But it's really not a problem, just using some of my background colour. Just carefully put a little bit of green back on there and blend that in. So it's totally possible to reshape things, rework certain areas as you go. But once you do get used to the bigger sticks, it's surprising just how much detail you can actually get with them. They've got really sharp edges, and one of the things that I like about the Unisons in particular is that you can break them without them crumbling to dust. And sometimes the very soft pastels will crumble a little bit too much if you try to break them. But with these I can really use them for as long as I can hold it in my fingertips. It's still useful. And again, I'm just a little bit too far outside my line there. Just want to take that back in a bit. Each little sweep of the antlers is really important to me because they have such distinctive shapes, where they bulge and how they join together. So I really want to pay particular attention to their shape, and just using the background colours to come back in and reshape things. So just following the same idea as the other side, working with the dark tones and some of the mid-tones first. Bringing in some more vibrant tones as well in these lower layers. Again, just making sure I've got all the nice dark tones in there before I start coming in with some more highlights. So like before, I'll just start with this nice warm lighter tone. Just starting to pick out some of the highlight areas. So yeah, I'd say I probably spend longer on the antlers than I will on the rest of the deer in this case. I don't have much of his body to do, just his face, which is quite small. There will only be so much room for detail, and that's such a useful exercise for painting bigger animals. I'm really putting all my effort here into making these antlers really pop from the background. But I have a feeling that I will be able to progress a little quicker on the actual deer. But this is definitely a good piece for you to practice along with me if something that you struggle with is fine detail. And Pastelmat is a great paper for that. I highly recommend this paper if what you really like is super fine detail. as you can get a lot of detail on this paper. So again, just using some background colours to adjust the shape of something. And now I'm going to pick out again some of those brightly highlighted white areas on each antler. And of course the trickiest part is right at the very tip of the point. Just doing my best to get pigment up there and then worry about shaping it later on. But really look at where the highlights are at their brightest, and then where they kind of become a bit more dull as perhaps the antler faces away from the sunlight a little bit. So really pay attention to each individual one. I'm just using my little blending tool again. Just to neaten some of those edges. So not the absolutely neatest attempt at that, but like before, I can come in, just try and shape that a little bit better. So just like before, really using the pastel pencils to come in afterwards and strengthen my highlight areas. And again, trying to drop in some little bits of vibrant colour, especially down those central areas where it turns from shadow into light. And you can see that I'm making use of a lot of blue violet on the shadows and then bringing in this really vibrant orange red. And by using two colours that are opposite each other on the colour wheel, that's really going to help to bring the 3D quality of this out. And if that's information that's quite new to you, then definitely go and check out some of my videos here on YouTube all about colour theory. As much of what I talk about in my tutorials is to do with my choice of colour and how that affects things. It's definitely an area that you want to learn more about if you're an artist in any medium, not just pastel. So on this scale, I'm not too concerned about the actual texture on the antlers. They're a bit too small to be worrying about that. Although here and there you can add a little hint of some of the texture. It's a little bit like the texture that you get on a tree trunk. It's not dissimilar to that. So just adding a little bit of texture up some parts of it. but not worrying about too much detail in each part because we're quite far away from them. So just breaking up those dark brown areas with some more blue. So it's definitely the most laborious part of this portrait. And it's good to get them done first and then move your way down the piece. But if you're really getting bored of antlers, it's fine also to work on and come back to them. I just like to get these things done at the beginning because they're at the top of the piece and it's at the easiest moment when I can lean my hand in different places. So I'll be really interested to hear how you guys get on with this. I definitely find antlers one of the most tricky challenges in terms of wildlife. So just a little bit of refinement now with the pastel pencils, and we're not too far off being able to move on to the rest of the stag. So I don't think that's too bad. I don't think I've taken a ridiculous amount of time just on the antlers, as I was worried I might. But Pastelmat really is good for when you want to get very crisp edges, even on a scale of this size. Just looking for all those little areas of shadow. trying to make each part sit out from the background. So in these sorts of areas you might be able to add a little bit of the texture that you can see on the antlers, but really don't be too concerned about small details like that. Just try and capture the overall light and shade. Again, thinking like as if each of these little segments is a little cylinder shape on its own. Now there's a lot less white highlight, you might notice, on this side of the deer. This side of the antlers just obviously facing slightly away from the sunshine. So a lot more white highlight happening over here. There's really not a lot of white coming down this part where it's just tilted away. Then over this little crest here, it just seems to catch the light a bit. So really be strict with yourself where you're seeing those highlight colours. So yeah, we're not too far off. With the antlers, I could spend a lot more time just going around, crisping up those edges, tweaking the shape of each little part. Again, just bringing in some little splashes of that vibrant orange. Really helping the sunlight effect, adding that lovely warm glow. So yeah, I think that will do me with the antlers. Gonna move on to the rest of the stag now. I may notice some more things to add to the antlers as I go, but that's pretty good for now. So I have yet to actually use any black in this piece, and I will bring in some little touches of black because there will be some black in the deer. I wanted to get the antlers done as much using the colours as possible, but there will be a little bit of really dark contrast in certain places on the face. And I may just add a little bit of that darker shadow down certain sides of the antlers but not too much. I want to keep those colours nice and bright and vibrant. But in certain places, in the real dark shadows, I will want a little bit of black just for that darkest contrast within the picture. Just using my pencil to plot in some of the markings on his head. Really across the top of his forehead here is in a lot of shadow. But again, it's this lovely dark brown that I was using a lot within the antlers that I'm going to use to add most of the dark, rich colours on the deer. And you can see that with my background I've really let it overlap the edges of the outline of my deer. And that means when I'm doing the edges of my deer, they really sit on top of the background. So my deer really ends up looking like it's in front. But you can see just how many layers of pastel this paper in particular can take. So I partly chose this photo reference because of the lighting. I liked how the light is coming from one side, and it makes some quite dramatic shadows across the animal. And if you recently saw my barn owl paint along, I also chose that one because of the lighting. And that's usually what attracts me to a photo reference if I'm going to paint it. Good dramatic lighting of some sort, allowing you to make use of lots of colours. So if you're starting out and you're trying to choose good photo reference to paint from, try and avoid things with really flat lighting. Try and get some good contrast and shadows in the photo reference. The more obvious the lighting is in the photo reference, well, the easier that's going to be for you to try and choose colours. Definitely, I think the more subtle the lighting is, the harder it is to choose your colours. So if you're trying to get good practice reference, try and choose things that have good light and shade, good contrast between those areas. So there's very little that I can see of the other eye. Just trying to get the bump of the eye, the eyebrow, and a hint of the eyeball as it protrudes out on the other side of the face. It won't take very much to make that area look acceptable. So we're going to be quite limited as to how much detail we can go into on the face. And that's another reason that I chose this particular photo reference. Some of my Stag photos don't have the highest resolution, and I'm always saying about working from photos with good quality resolution. But then sometimes when you're painting something and you want to paint it with a bit less detail, it's actually quite good to use a photo reference that has less detail.